What if I told you that the charming Victorian Christmas cards your great-grandmother treasured weren't filled with angels and holly, but with dead birds, knife-wielding frogs, and children being devoured by insects? The cozy Christmas imagery we've inherited from the Victorian era, those peaceful robins, snow-covered cottages, and rosy-cheeked families gathered around glowing hearths, represents one of history's most successful marketing campaigns. Behind the gilt edges and silk fringes of these supposed tokens of love lay a world of social anxiety, industrial exploitation, and a fascination with death so profound it would make modern horror fans uncomfortable. The Victorian Christmas card wasn't just a greeting. It was a weapon in the war of social status, a product of toxic industrial processes, and a window into a collective unconscious grappling with mortality, class warfare, and the rapid dissolution of everything their society once considered stable. These weren't innocent tokens of affection. They were coded messages in a language we've forgotten how to read, carrying meanings that would shock us if we truly understood them. Picture yourself opening an envelope in 1885. You expect a nativity scene, or perhaps a cheerful snowman. Instead, you discover a meticulously crafted lithograph of a robin lying stiff on its back, tiny feet pointing skyward, with "Wishing you joy this Christmas" emblazoned in gold letters beneath its corpse. Or perhaps you receive a card depicting a turnip with a disturbingly human face, complete with wrinkles and a knowing smirk, captioned, "May you have a turnip for Christmas." These weren't anomalies. They were mainstream designs, purchased and sent by respectable middle-class families to their dearest friends and relatives. To understand why requires us to journey into a world where Christmas was being invented in real time, where industrial machinery ground human suffering into glittering consumer products, and where the pressure of maintaining social respectability created a market for the macabre. The secrets of Victorian Christmas cards reveal not just a different aesthetic sensibility, but an entirely different way of processing fear, death, and human connection. Chapter 1. The Fad of Victorian Luxury. A World of Illusions. The myth of the spontaneous Victorian Christmas begins to crumble the moment we examine its origins. In 1843, Sir Henry Cole stood in his London office, staring at a pile of unanswered correspondence that threatened to destroy his social standing. Cole wasn't a romantic. He was a civil servant, the man instrumental in developing the penny post system that had revolutionized British communication. The Industrial Revolution had accelerated the pace of life beyond recognition. The leisurely rhythms that once allowed for handwritten letters to every acquaintance had been replaced by the relentless ticking of factory clocks and train schedules. Cole faced a distinctly modern problem. Too many social obligations. Too little time. In Victorian society, failing to acknowledge correspondence wasn't merely rude. It was social suicide. It could cost business contracts, marriage prospects, and one's standing in the community. Cole needed efficiency. He needed a way to satisfy the rigorous demands of etiquette without the emotional labor of genuine connection. His solution birthed an industry. Cole commissioned artist John Colcott Horsley to design a triptych card, 3 panels showing a wealthy family toasting the recipient, flanked by scenes of charity. He printed 1,000 copies, sold the extras for $1 each, and unknowingly created the template for modern consumer holidays. But even this first card sparked controversy. The central image showed a child sipping wine, outraging the temperance society who condemned it as promoting youth drunkenness. From its very inception, the Christmas card was mired in the contradictions that would define the medium. The card wasn't born as a sacred tradition. It was born as a productivity hack for an overwhelmed bureaucrat. It was the perfect product for the penny post system, which had shifted postage costs from recipient to sender, democratizing communication while simultaneously commodifying it. The Christmas card became the ideal vehicle for this new system. Cheap to send, easy to mass produce, and capable of maintaining social networks with minimal emotional investment. Yet as decades passed, this utilitarian convenience transformed into an elaborate facade of luxury. By the 1870s, the simple lithograph had evolved into a sensory marvel. These weren't flimsy pieces of paper. They were tactile experiences that engaged every sense. Some cards featured real silk fringe that tickled fingertips like delicate spider webs. Others were embossed with layers of paper lace so intricate they seemed to breathe. Mechanical cards opened like miniature theaters, revealing three-dimensional scenes, while scented varieties released bursts of violet or rose when removed from their envelopes. The sensory experience of handling these cards was intoxicating. In a Victorian drawing room, warmed by coal fires that filled the air with a metallic, smoky sweetness, the arrival of the morning post created a daily ritual of anticipation. The rustle of thick paper, the whisper of silk against gloved fingers, the flash of gold lettering catching gaslight, every element was designed to create an impression of luxury and care. But this opulence served a darker purpose. It was camouflage. Just as heavy velvet curtains hid the grimy streets outside Victorian windows, the elaborate beauty of Christmas cards concealed the impersonal nature of the exchange. The more money and technology invested in the card's appearance, the less genuine sentiment was required inside. Generic verses printed in gold script replaced the need for authentic words. Senders could hide behind aesthetic magnificence, offering a product instead of a piece of their soul. The luxury was a performance, a dazzling light shone in recipients' eyes to blind them to the fact that they were merely names on a list. It was manufactured intimacy in an age growing increasingly distant and mechanized. The cards created an illusion of personal attention while actually facilitating its absence. But if the front of the card was a glittering deception of lace and gold, the machinery that created it revealed a different truth entirely. Behind every delicate flower and cherubic face lay a world of industrial labor, toxic chemicals, and human exploitation that the Victorian consumer preferred not to see. The facade was magnificent, but it was built on foundations that would horrify those who admired the finished product. As we hold these beautiful objects, we must ask, who built these illusions? What dark materials were ground up to produce such vibrant, hypnotic colors? And why, as the cards became more elaborate and expensive, did their imagery become increasingly bizarre and disturbing? The answers lie not in the parlors where the cards were displayed, but in the factories where they were manufactured, and in the minds of the people who created them. Chapter 2. The Invisible World. Servants and Shadows Behind the Cards. To understand the true nature of Victorian Christmas cards, we must descend from the warmth of the drawing room to the clamor of the printing house. The explosion of the card industry wasn't powered by holiday magic. It was driven by the relentless machinery of the Industrial Revolution and a revolutionary technology that changed how the world saw color: chromolithography. Before the mid-19th century, color printing was prohibitively expensive. Images were printed in black and white, then hand-colored by armies of low-paid workers, often children, who would dab a single spot of red on thousands of Santa coats before passing the sheet to the next child holding a pot of green. But the Victorian era was obsessed with progress, and inventors raced to mechanize beauty itself. Chromolithography was the breakthrough that made mass-produced color possible. The process involved using heavy limestone blocks, each drawn with grease-based crayons to hold specific ink colors. Creating a single Christmas card with 12 distinct colors required preparing 12 separate stones. Paper had to be pressed onto each stone with microscopic precision. If it shifted even a fraction of a millimeter, the image would blur and the card would be ruined. Imagine the atmosphere in these printing houses scattered across London, Boston, and Leipzig. The air hung thick with the acrid smell of turpentine and oil, mixing with the metallic tang of machinery and the sweet cloying scent of various chemical compounds. The noise was deafening. The rhythmic thump-hiss-thump of steam-powered presses that shook floorboards and rattled windows. In this invisible world, the sentiment of the season was measured in quotas and shift hours, not warm feelings. The master printers, often German immigrants who brought lithographic secrets to Britain and America, conducted this industrial symphony. But the orchestra consisted of the working poor. Men, women, and children who labored in windowless rooms, breathing fumes that coated their lungs while they created images of pastoral beauty and domestic bliss for people who would never know their names. There was a sinister chemical secret hidden in the vibrant colors Victorians craved. They particularly loved Scheele's green, a brilliant emerald pigment used in wallpapers, dresses, and printing inks. This vivid green contained arsenic. The irony was chilling. Cards sent to wish health and happiness often contained trace amounts of poison. Workers who dusted these powders or handled wet prints slowly absorbed toxins, sacrificing their health to manufacture images of vitality for the upper classes. In America, Louis Prong reigned as the father of the American Christmas card. This German refugee didn't just print cards, he elevated them to high art. Prang held national competitions with massive cash prizes for artists who could design the most beautiful greetings. His Roxbury, Massachusetts factories were marvels of efficiency, producing 5 million cards annually by 1881. He democratized art, bringing masterwork reproductions into common homes for pennies. But even Prang couldn't escape the commodification pressures. As markets exploded, demand for novelty became voracious. Artists and writers, the invisible creatives, worked under immense pressure to produce something new, something that would catch eyes in crowded shop windows. They couldn't simply draw another holly wreath. This pressure cooker of competition and mass production began warping the imagery itself, pushing designers toward increasingly bizarre and attention-grabbing subjects. Meanwhile, in the grand homes where these cards would be displayed, another invisible workforce managed the elaborate social rituals surrounding their exchange. Servants witnessed everything while remaining officially unseen. The housemaid gathering scattered cards from the drawing-room table saw who sent embossed cards with gilt edges and who sent flimsy, mass-printed scraps. She noticed which cards were handled tenderly and which were discarded with indifference. Through simple observation, domestic staff developed intimate maps of their employers' social worlds, drawn entirely from paper and ink. This created a peculiar form of social surveillance. Servants knew which relationships mattered, which were declining, and which carried romantic undercurrents. A maid instructed to leave that one on the writing desk, a footman noticing cards hidden quickly in reticules, a butler observing which gentlemen's cards were saved year after year. The house staff became unofficial archivists of their employers' emotional lives. The disconnect between maker and user was absolute. Factory girls trimming silk fringe on thousands of cards daily would likely never receive one themselves. They were mechanics of joy from which they were excluded. Artists sketching bountiful feast scenes might work in drafty garrets, hungry and cold. This was the engine of Victorian Christmas, a system converting the labor and suffering of the invisible class into polished, consumable products for the elite. As production machinery grew faster and more efficient, it began feeding a new hunger. The public was no longer satisfied with simple greetings. They wanted to be shocked, amused, and titillated. The invisible world of factories was about to start churning out nightmares, responding to subconscious demands from consumers that we're only beginning to understand. The machines were warmed up, the stones were inked, and they were ready to print things that should have stayed in the dark. Chapter 3. The Rituals of the Elite. When etiquette became a prison, we ascend from factory noise to the suffocating silence of Victorian drawing rooms, where Christmas cards weren't merely decorations, they were weapons in a high-stakes war of social positioning. The card exchange had evolved from Cole's simple efficiency hack into a rigorous ritual that could destroy reputations if mishandled. To modern observers, sending cards seems like casual pleasantry. To Victorians, it was a test of memory, status, and etiquette that demanded military precision. By the 1880s, the sheer volume of cards moving through postal systems was staggering. In 1880, the British Post Office issued its first post early warnings, a phrase born from genuine logistical panic as millions of envelopes clogged the empire's communication arteries. But why the frenzy? Why did people feel compelled to send cards to acquaintances they barely knew, or perhaps even disliked? The answer lay in Victorian obsession with categorization and accumulation. This was the era of collectors. People gathered ferns, beetles, fossils, and stamps with scientific fervor. Naturally, they began collecting social connections. Christmas cards became physical manifestations of one's social network, proof of existence, relevance, and remembrance. The center of this ritual was the scrapbook. Victorian albums weren't hobbies, they were public records. Families spent evenings pasting received cards into large, leather-bound volumes displayed prominently in parlors for visitors to examine. A thick album filled with expensive, elaborate cards from important people was a trophy, signaling to guests that this family was well-connected and respected. Conversely, thin albums or those filled with cheap single-layer cards branded families as socially irrelevant. Imagine the anxiety of a Victorian matron in mid-December, sitting at her escritoire with a ledger of social debts before her. If Mrs. Halloway sent a beautiful prong lithograph with silk fringe last year, she must receive a card of equal or greater value this year. Sending a cheaper card would constitute an insult. Sending no card would declare war. The return card created immense stress. If unexpected cards arrived on Christmas Eve, panic ensued. Servants would be dispatched into snow to find open stationers, tasked with securing suitable reciprocal offerings before holiday deadlines passed. This transformed Christmas into a performance of administrative endurance. The archetypal lady of the house was less a mother enjoying her children than a general coordinating a campaign. She navigated treacherous waters of taste and class. A card too humorous might offend pious relatives, while one too religious might bore dashing suitors. Selection became a minefield, requiring intimate knowledge of recipients' personalities, relationships, and recent circumstances. Within this rigid system, the cards themselves began acting as pressure valves. Because Victorian social rules were so restrictive, so buttoned up and repressed, card imagery became where psychological pressure escaped. Etiquette was prison, but images were graffiti on cell walls. This explains why, amid uptight, status-obsessed culture, cards drifted from religious iconography towards something much stranger. Victorians were trapped by corsets, stiff collars, and endless rules governing who could speak to whom and when. Christmas cards, while being tools of entrapment, also became subconscious rebellion against it. If society demanded sending cards to boring cousins, why not send ones featuring rats dancing in human clothing? The ritual had created markets for the absurd. Profound boredom and anxiety of social climbing required release. As albums filled with standard snowy churches, eyes craved something different. Something acknowledging life's absurdity. The elite played games of polite smiles and perfect manners, but cards they exchanged would reveal suppressed nightmares. The trap of etiquette had set stages for macabre entrances. What began as Cole's simple solution to correspondence overload had metastasized into a complex social organism that fed on anxiety and status competition, creating demand for increasingly bizarre imagery as people sought ways to express what proper society forbade them to say directly. Chapter 4. The Dark Side of Wealth, Power, Misery, and the Price of Comfort. Now we confront the mystery's heart. We've seen factories and parlors, understood the how and why of exchange, but haven't fully grappled with the what. Browsing genuine Victorian Christmas card collections today, modern viewers eventually recoil in confusion and horror. Interspersed among flowers and children are images belonging to fever dreams or horror films, the dark side of Victorian imagination, printed in bright colors and mailed to loved ones. Consider the infamous dead robin trope. To modern eyes, cards depicting small birds lying stiff with feet skyward, captioned "A Loving Greeting," appear as sick jokes or threats. But Victorians read multiple symbolic layers. Robins symbolized postmen, who wore red vests and were nicknamed Robins, so dead robins could be dark humor about exhausted mail carriers. More profoundly, robins carried Christian symbolism. Legend held they gained red breasts from Christ's blood while removing crown thorns, making them sacred birds, living reminders of sacrifice and redemption. But robins also appeared in folk tales as psychopomps, creatures guiding souls to afterlives. Window-appearing robins might be departed loved ones checking on the living. Robin deaths portended family mortality. When Victorians sent dead robin cards, they weren't being morbid for shock value. They acknowledged winter death reality in eras when mortality spiked dramatically during cold months. Before central heating, antibiotics, or adequate nutrition for the poor, winter killed. Children died from scarlet fever and diphtheria. Elderly succumbed to pneumonia. Even wealthy families in grand homes knew winter meant death. Dead robins were memento mori, death reminders that came to all, even during supposed joy seasons. Anthropomorphic vegetables appeared with disturbing frequency. Turnips, parsnips, and potatoes with human faces engaged in human activities like dancing or music making. These weren't cute Disney characters. They were rendered with unsettling realism that made them genuinely creepy. Turnips with carefully painted human faces, complete with wrinkles and knowing expressions, stared from cards captioned, "May you have a turnip for Christmas." This seemingly absurd imagery carried multiple meaning layers. In rural Britain, turnips meant winter survival, among few vegetables storable through cold months, providing sustenance when fresh food was scarce. But turnips were also poor people's food, last resorts when nothing better was available. Wishing someone turnips for Christmas could be friendship jokes acknowledging shared poverty or hard times, or subtle insults suggesting low status or fallen circumstances. Victorian class systems were so rigid that even vegetable imagery carried coded social position messages. Insects presented another puzzle. Victorian cards frequently featured beetles, spiders, and cockroaches dressed in human clothing, engaged in human activities. Beetles in top hats might propose to lady beetles in ball gowns. Spiders hosted tea parties. These weren't children's cards. They were sent between adults, often people of considerable social standing. What were respectable Victorians doing, exchanging dressed-up bug pictures at Christmas? Part of the answer lay in Victorian natural history fascination and natural theology doctrine. Victorians believed studying nature revealed God's design and purpose. Every creature, however small or seemingly insignificant, had divine order places. Insects, with complex life cycles and intricate structures, were miniature creation marvels. Depicting them in human situations wasn't just whimsical, it made theological points about creation interconnectedness and humanity's place within it. But darker undercurrents existed. Victorian eras brought tremendous anxiety about social mobility and class boundaries. Industrial revolution created new wealth and social classes that didn't fit neatly into old feudal hierarchies. Yesterday's peasants became factory owners with more money than minor aristocrats. Old certainties about social belonging were crumbling. Depicting insects in human clothing might comment on social upheaval, visual metaphors for people putting on airs or rising above natural stations. Beetles in top hats were absurd precisely because they tried being something they weren't, just as nouveau riche were seen as absurdly imitating betters. Cards frequently featured children in peril, being chased by giant insects about to be eaten by grotesque creatures in obvious danger situations. To modern sensibilities, these seem like last things you'd want as holiday greetings. But Victorian childhood was precarious beyond modern comprehension. Infant mortality rates were staggeringly high. In some urban areas, half of all children died before age 5. Childhood diseases now prevented by simple vaccinations were death sentences. Accidents were common in homes heated by open fires and lit by candles and gas flames. Every Victorian parent lived with constant, gnawing fears that children might not survive to adulthood. Cards depicting endangered children weren't meant to frighten. They acknowledged shared fears, giving form to anxieties that couldn't be spoken in polite company. Sending such cards might say to fellow parents, "I know what you fear, because I fear it too." We live where our children are vulnerable, where danger lurks in our homes, where death can come despite our protection efforts. Cards became ways of sharing burdens, acknowledging darkness beneath Victorian domestic bliss veneer. Perhaps most unsettling were frequent incorporations of grotesque and Gothic elements. Cards featured ghosts, demons, and supernatural creatures regularly. Skeletons danced at Christmas feasts. Death personified appeared as holiday gathering guests. These weren't horror-themed joke cards. They were mainstream designs reflecting genuine Victorian beliefs that Christmas was when veils between worlds grew thin, when spirits walked among living, when supernatural became tangible. This belief had ancient roots in pre-Christian winter solstice celebrations, when year's longest nights were thought times of particular spiritual power and danger. Victorians, despite rationality and scientific progress reputations, never fully abandoned old superstitions. Ghost stories were traditional Christmas entertainment. Families gathered around fires on Christmas Eve, telling haunting and supernatural encounter tales. Christmas cards reflected this tradition, bringing Gothic directly into homes through Morning Post. What we witness in strange Victorian Christmas cards is transitional society, caught between old beliefs and new realities, between rural traditions and urban modernity, between religious certainty and scientific doubt. Cards navigated contradictions, expressing things that couldn't be said directly, acknowledging fears and anxieties with no place in carefully constructed Victorian respectability worlds. Every dead robin, anthropomorphized vegetable, and endangered child was facade cracks, glimpses of roiling darkness beneath Victorian Christmas cheer surfaces. Yet for all their strangeness, these cards were genuine connection and affection expressions. Victorians took card sending seriously, spending hours selecting right designs for each recipient, considering what messages each image would convey, what shared understandings it would invoke. Cards were elaborate social ritual parts, relationship maintenance ways, and demonstrations that one had thought about recipients, taken time and expense to send greetings. In ages before telephones, easy travel, or instant communication, these cards were vital social fabric threads, connecting people across distances and maintaining bonds that might otherwise fray. The secret of Victorian Christmas cards isn't that they were strange. It's that they were honest. They acknowledged what we try hiding, Celebration exists in mortality's shadow. Joy is precious because it's fragile. Human connection matters precisely because we're all vulnerable and alone without it. They understood darkness makes light meaningful. Acknowledging death makes life sweeter, that full human experience ranges, grotesque and beautiful, macabre and sentimental, frightening and comforting, belongs in our celebrations because it belongs in our lives. When we dismiss Victorian Christmas cards as merely weird historical artifacts, we miss profound truths they carried. These strange, beautiful, disturbing images were attempts to hold complexity together, to celebrate while acknowledging sorrow, to express love while recognizing loss, to maintain connection while confronting isolation. They remind us that authentic celebration doesn't require perfection or sanitization. It requires honesty about the full spectrum of human experience, darkness and light together, mortality and joy intertwined like holly and ivy in an ancient, enduring dance.